So I wanted to make a video just about some of my observations about the way that you celebrate the Christmas season and some of the things that you kind of just see every year, uh, in different places. And I guess as a starting point, there was a meme that was going around. There's many of them, but, for instance, somebody posted this one that said, like, it was like from an atheist guy, and it said Christians hijack everything, and it was this whole list of all the Christmas traditions and their like supposed pagan origins or whatever. And the responses to that, of course there are some Christians, like really fundamentalist Christians, who are really so concerned about that they won't have a Christmas tree or things like that. And but most Christians are totally fine with the fact that it's either not historically true, and that may be how they want to argue it and say these things are not in fact pagan in origin, or they'll just say it's okay, we have recaptured those symbols and it's syncretism or whatever, but in a good way. And this is kind of, I would say, maybe big on the like trad side of things, and you have things like it's been going on for a long time where you'll have things like Dante, he's using Virgil in his Divine Comedy, and it's kind of like Christianizing the pagan world. And we have this thing, it's like Plato and Aristotle are like virtuous saints before the time of Christ, or Alexander the Great, or all these things that we hear, especially like in the medieval thing, and that's obviously something that people are really big into. There's kind of a lot of that kind of stuff around our little corner. And like there was one response where somebody was, I couldn't find the one. There's some other ones that were like it, but there's the guy crying like, oh, Christmas is pagan, and like the little Orthodox guys like, Toyotathon is ours now, and Shark Week is ours now. We're taking all of your holidays, like, so it's kind of celebrating this aspect of Christianity that can absorb things from other places and integrate it into our practice. And of course, I think where it butts up, the true aspect of it is that there are aspects of culture, there's nothing intrinsically sinful or wrong about them, because if you only hold to a particular type of culture being sacred, then you are insisting that people conform to that particular culture just in order to be part of God's family. And I don't think that is, it's definitely not something like an evangelical person could support. Like in Islam, for instance, it's the insistence that you must speak Arabic, and you kind of eventually, countries that become Islamicized will all reflect Arab culture to a certain degree. Now, there will be the variety within that, but the scope of the variety is very much closed off to the parameters of what you allow in. And then you have the same thing like in a Hasidic community where you only speak Hebrew, or one where they only speak Yiddish, or if you were speaking Greek in the Greek church, or Latin in the earlier days of Catholicism and things like that. It's the kind of the spirit of Hellenization, to say like somebody has to adopt the culture first and then they can receive the truths. Whereas I think Christianity is a religion of universal truths, and so it is good and it can fit and adapt to other things. I would even say that's kind of baked into the story around Christmas time through the story of the wise men, because no one would say that these are Jews, these are pagan magi of some kind, Babylonian or whatever, and they're coming to visit Jesus. So it's already like explaining the universality of the need for a savior, because that message is so baked into Genesis, and it's spread to all of the nations, the need for a savior. While we kind of like can think that's cool, and we get really excited about how like medieval Christians kind of Christianized pagan myths and things, and we kind of celebrate that in some areas of our circle. I feel like when we see it in the current day, we think it's cringy, we don't like it, or we try to categorically say it's a different thing. And if this is connected to, the thing I did about LARP Christianity, how, why not just make it, you could make the cultural aspects are not, the particulars are not what it's about. It's not about if you use no musical instruments, traditional musical instruments, or modern musical instruments. There's really not a difference in that. If you think there is, if you think that that's a thing that makes somebody in or out, you're wrong. It's fine if you're saying that's what works for our little community, because then people who have a preference for that can find their community. If somebody thinks that using a piano is sinful, they can go to the church where they only sing a cappella. If somebody thinks that pipe organs, which, as I mentioned, is they're technological wonders, really. But if somebody thinks that that is okay and traditional, but like an electric guitar or a modern keyboard is not, then that's fine. They can go to the church where they have that. That's like a conscience thing. But I just wanted to bring this kind of topic up in light of a few things. So, we have little kids, and there's lots of free stuff you can do around the holidays, put on by different churches. So we went to this one thing at a Assemblies of God church, a big one that has a lot of volunteers and is able to put on big things. And they have this big light thing, and I'll show some little clips I put in, where they basically had a theme this year. It was the theme of the thing was sort of based on the Super Mario Brothers movie, and so they had all these different stations as you walked through with scenes from the Nativity story, and they were all these 8-bit design icons with little Mario-esque characteristics kind of inserted into it. And there was this annoying snowflake that would talk, and he would do Mario voices. And
I hope you enjoyed your adventure at Westover Field of Lights. Goodbye and Merry Christmas. Blake out.
All this weird thing. Obviously it's this is for kids. Kids are supposed to think it's fun and exciting. And then they even had, at the end, they had characters dressed up from Mario and Peach and Koopa, and the kids could take a picture with them. And so they had all this stuff. And I know so many people would just be like, oh, this is so cringy. It's this thing, this seeker-sensitive thing, or trying to reach out to the culture. And I just think as a useful thought experiment, we should think about that is very much a way that it seems to us right now for many people, because you have this concept of Christianity as being sacred and holy, and to see it mashed up against this movie about a video game from our childhood, it seems irreverent and disrespectful and all that. So that was one. But I'm thinking okay, that may be the way that we feel now, but how did the first person think when they read the Divine Comedy or something? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much. Because who is that more offensive to? The thing with the Mario, the people who came because they're just free Christmas lights, something to do with kids, and they don't care so much about the Jesus part of the story. They're going to this thing purely for the fact that it's a fun, free event. But then they are hearing, oh yes, the real meaning of Christmas is about the birth of the Savior. Are they, if they don't have a prior concept of the sacred in connection with faith and Christianity, will they be offended? Probably not. So that's really a Christian bias that we're kind of importing into the situation. So, I think that's something that we ought to think about, because in the other way, like when you think about uh, some of these older writings, that church fathers, or some of the things like Augustine put in, I've read some of City of God, and he's kind of like taking the stuff that's going on, the plays that they're watching that people were like, oh, it's just entertainment, and he's saying like, no, like, this, like, there's a real God and there's significance to it, and he's kind of doing the mashup. And for the people who are outside the church, I think it is an effective thing, and I think that's why that kind of syncretism exists. Anyway, that's just to say, it may be cringy to us, but I think that we need to take a step back from that and think about why we feel that way, and if it's really something we should be criticizing. Now, the other thing that I went to was actually this big. It was like 40 minutes long. It was like a nativity play or whatever at SeaWorld. So there's a couple interesting things about SeaWorld. One is when you go there, it looks like a cathedral, and they have it all decorated with a giant stained glass rose window of an orca. So that's kind of just an interesting instance of like symbolism happens or whatever. The other interesting thing is when you go and see the orcas, and I mentioned this in regard to Paul Vanderklay when he was talking about the ARC conference and the music that they have there. They have this song that I will share the link to. It's the style of music that has like won. And that's what I'm saying. The ARC conference needs to learn from SeaWorld, because they have this song that sounds like a worship song. It's got like all this like cultural influence from like world music and things like that, but it's very much of like a Hillsong type worship song, but not Christian. And it's not even like necessarily bad, but they kind of jam like some things in there about like diversity, but it's a weird nature worship song. It's just fascinating, because when you listen to it and when you're there, like, and there's these orcas like splashing and stuff and like coming in, they're like doing flips, and it really does evoke like powerful emotions. So they know what they're doing with this stuff, but they're just using it to point to aspects of creation other than the creator. So that's an interesting little aside. A nativity play or whatever at SeaWorld, where they basically, it's all Christmas carols, like in medleys, like familiar Christmas carols that they turn into songs, and they use to tell the story while they have people acting it out. And I actually, when we were watching, I was like, is this a Mormon thing? Because the people, just the kind of the way they were dressed. Made me think that they were like, it reminded me of the weird way that people dress at like on the Mormon temple, because they were wearing like angel outfits, but then they had like white ties and shirts, like button-down shirts and stuff underneath it.
The person is brought to this point, and the worker gives 3 distinct taps with metal.
So that was just kind of a weird thing. Anyway, so this production had like a really good production value, really high quality, and they jammed just about every, I would say, common conception of like what is in the Christmas story, the popular narrative of the Christmas story, into this short 40-ish minute thing. And there are so many points in it that people will argue about. I would say the people that could have potential problems with this would be evangelicals who are super worried about historical accuracy, Catholics and Orthodox who are strangely only worried about historical accuracy when it conflicts with certain things that they have dogmatic beliefs about, which I'll get to in a second, and people that don't like the fact that Christmas is about Jesus. So, like, I don't know, atheists or something. These are some of the things that would be contested. Mary and Joseph, are they like their age and their romantic connection? Let's see. You get to Bethlehem and the story about the inn being full, and they had like these jokes about the Holy Day Inn was full, and maybe check at the Chariot. Like, so obviously like modern hotel jokes they kind of put in there a little bit. There was a wooden manger, which people like, even my own pastor, I don't know, he preached a sermon last week about how somehow it was really important to his thing about how it's probably a stone manger. The interesting thing about that is that wooden items don't typically last 2,000 years, so that's almost an archaeological argument from silence. And trees in Judea, we don't know, but they had carpenters. From King Solomon had the men learn from the Lebanese or the Sidonians or whatever. So they were there, and they cut down so many trees during the Jewish wars. So we don't know how forested Israel was. But anyway, so in this narrative, they kind of packed in a lot of stuff. They had the wise men be in there at the same time. That's, historically not accurate or whatever. It had talking animals. Then they brought all these real animals there. There was a llama, or an alpaca. Pretty sure that was not accurate, but it was fun. They had real camels, so that's like pretty impressive, anytime you go to a play with real camels. But the thing that kind of struck me about it was that, like, if you think about symbolic thinking or iconic thinking or something like that, like icons are these kind of like narrative compressing images, where it's got all these symbolic details because you can put it all in, and each thing has some sort of significance to the information that it's trying to portray and share. And I actually looked at some pictures of different icons of the Nativity, Catholic and Orthodox, to kind of see like what is the narrative that they're putting forth. And I think because this is an area where they will argue with Protestants and evangelicals, because we have different beliefs about like Mary and our doctrines about her and things like that. If we kind of take like the Peugeot view of things, like Jonathan Peugeot is not concerned with historical details. Historical details are not important to him. Whether the flood was global or not, whether this or that miracle really took place, maybe necessarily, or because it's more about whatever the symbolic thing. And if that's the case, I think we go back to like those memes at the beginning, like the Christmas tree has won. Nobody's going to get rid of Christmas trees because it's pagan or whatever. There are symbols that have won, the evolutionary race, the survival to the fittest. And I think that the interesting thing is that overall, what this like play represented is the symbolic interpretation of the Christmas story that has won. And what I mean by that is I'm going to contrast some of these things. So if you look at the Orthodox icons, there's a bunch of details that you find that are consistent in those icons, and they would claim that this is a preservation of tradition. Now, of course, that tradition really only goes back so far, like, I don't know, to the 600s or 700s or something like that. But here's some of the things you'll notice. So it's a cave. It's not a wooden structure. Not that matters or whatever, but it is a cave. So it's not a house, which is one of the things you'll hear, that like the inn or whatever, or the stable was part of the house. Maybe that was the case. It doesn't have to be that, the normative way that most people lived tells us exactly what happened in this one specific instance. So they have it in a cave. That's one thing. And then they always have Joseph on the outside, because it's something about like a man would never be in there while a woman's giving birth, and there was probably relatives or whatever. So you have just Mary and Jesus in this cave with Joseph outside, and Joseph's always an old man because they've accepted this tradition, which comes from like the proto-evangelion of James or whatever, that that Joseph is this older man who was always planning to have a celibate relationship with Mary because this was just like something that kindly older men did to these women who were like some kind of a like Vestal Virgin thing that I don't think is part of Judaism at all. And I'm pretty sure Jacob would agree because what the Bible says is that Mary was betrothed. She was betrothed. So she was a woman that was expecting to get married. Married means children. That was what a good young Jewish woman was supposed to do, was be married and have children. And so this weird thing where they portray it as like an old man who never slept with his wife and wouldn't, because he was old, he wasn't really interested in that. Like that's part of their narrative mythology. So I would say it kind of looks like propaganda to me by making all these images that continually reinforce that certain narrative. And then if you look at the Catholic ones, they don't have the same thing with like the old Joseph. They have like this more like cuck Joseph. Like he's just like this guy who is closer in age to Mary, but he's just like, it's okay if we never go all the way, Mary. We can just cuddle and I'm happy with that. Like he's just like this loser boyfriend Joseph who doesn't want to be a real husband to Mary because, the perpetual virginity and all that stuff. And, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to believe that like Mary and Joseph were in love or they had some great romance or something. I think that would probably be to impose like too much of 20 and 21st century thinking about those sort of things onto the situation. But I would say that at a minimum, if there was any normalcy to their arrangement, these were people that expected to have a real life together and to have kids. And one of the things that we know for the development of healthy children is that the most important things that children can see is parents who love each other in a normal, affectionate way that married people love each other. So like if Joseph and Mary had a relationship where they never consummated it, there's no way that they would act normal, and that would be very weird and suspicious to everybody around them. And I think and that's even to go beyond all the things about how the brothers and sisters passages where they say it's like relatives or cousins or something like that. Like perhaps there's enough ambiguity in the way that it was written because God foresaw that people would have these interpretations, and it's his grace that allows them to go through life probably being wrong, and it doesn't really affect anything. But what I'm saying is that the symbols that have won are that it was like a normal relationship. And I think like from a guy's perspective, you can see Joseph, like nobody can relate to this thing of like nobody in church is calling on older men to go marry single mothers and never have sex with them. But it is a situation that like a lot of people find themselves in, or where maybe a guy can read that story and be like, I'm not like Joseph wasn't excited about what was going on there, but he did it anyway. Like that's something somebody could relate to. And I think since no other women are becoming virgin mothers, Mary's much more relatable to as a real mother of real children with a real husband for them. And I think that, even historically we can see like with the monastic movement and stuff, like that caused harm. And like when they said that Constantinople fell because there was more monks than soldiers and there was more nuns than married women, that's a problem of prioritizing this weird narrative over like the thing that's normalized from Genesis all the way through, which is normally most people get married and have children. And obviously, like, it's okay if you don't. Like, that's okay. Not everybody does, but most people do. And I think it's, when we just talk about like the incarnation and all this stuff, like what's unique about Jesus, I think what's unique about him is that he never sinned, but his life was not necessarily, it wasn't the circumstance of his birth or the removal of the stain of original sin from his mother that made him unique. Joseph and Mary, I think, were regular people and probably godly people and good people that God chose for that purpose. But I don't think that we need to make them a special thing. And so it's interesting because in the areas where the Protestant common evangelical symbolism has won, those are the areas where Catholics and Orthodox will want to argue historical details and try to make a normative case for their beliefs. So those are my thoughts. And anyway, I thought one other thing is, I didn't get into the whole Santa Claus thing, but Santa Claus is really interesting because as Santa Claus and Christmas spirit have remained like things that people will make movies about and make shows about. Like it's interesting how the mythology behind Santa keeps developing in these secular movies and TV shows. And I was telling somebody that I think it's not going to be too long before somebody's going to make a Santa Claus movie where it's going to be integral to the plot that Santa Claus dies and is resurrected. Like, that's just the way it's going. As these people, as we remove the Christ element, the things that fill its void, that actually work, the things that succeed, the things that win, reflect the truth. And so I think in one sense that's why I could say the Mary and Joseph being real people that were really married kind of reflects the truth in the fact that that is the image and the symbolism that seems to have won the meme wars.